quadruple the carbon tax, which will grind our economy to a halt. It will be a nuclear winter for our economy. Why don't we allow Canadians to vote in a carbon tax election to decide if they're ready to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime?
They're going to cut the dental. They're going to axe the pharmacare. They're going to break the health system, and they're going to destroy childcare. The difference between those slogans and the nonsense he throws around, the vacuous garbage that's best left for Nabisco, not for the House of Commons, is that's the stuff he's actually going to do.
Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party say they're pushing to give Canadians a carbon tax election as soon as possible through a vote of non-confidence in the government set to happen tomorrow in the House of Commons. But the Liberals aren't backing down on the pollution pricing system that's become a key piece of their climate plan. Our front bench is back to break down the political strategy. Zita Astravas, James Moore, Tom Mulcair, and Marika Walsh. Marika, I'll start with you. I imagine tomorrow at this time the House of Commons will, for all intents and purposes, look exactly the same as it does this afternoon. We know that because the Bloc and the NDP have already identified that they're going to vote against the Conservatives and with the government. But what do you think the cumulative effect of the last week, the introduction of what this motion will say, the actual motion, the debate today, like what has been the effect, do you think, overall in the parties?
I think the effect is to make the Liberals more confident in their standing in the House this fall. They have two dance partners, two negotiating partners with the NDP and the Bloc. The Bloc are much more clear in public about what they want and what the price tag is, although unclear on how soon they want that before all the confidence votes run out. Who knows when they schedule them all. And the NDP are kind of giving different messaging on the day. Peter Julian was suggesting that his support for the government was tied to the pharmacare with your show over the weekend. Jagmeet Singh seemed to be suggesting today that it's about giving voters the time to see the NDP as the alternative. But all of that means that the Liberals also get time. And that's what they wanted heading into this House sitting. I do feel, though, James, that there is like this sense of instability. Like even though that this was an early test and it seems like things are as they are for a bit, the Bloc keeps musing about the things that they want to see and that they're not afraid to go to an election before the end of the year. There are many other opposition day motions ahead of us. It does feel different in Parliament than it did, let's say, even a year ago. You've lived through a lot of that. What is the impact of that?
Yeah, I mean, it can feel that way, but on the ground, I actually think the Liberals have a relatively solid horizon in front of them, right? There's not a lot of sitting days between now and Christmas. You have the Thanksgiving break, you have Remembrance Week. There are other windows that are happening. Plus, of course, you got the campaigns that are happening now in British Columbia, will be in Saskatchewan, New Brunswick. The United States is going on as well. And if you look at the legislation that's before Parliament, you have the First Nations drinking access to water legislation, the Online Harms Act. So there's stuff that they can pull in the window, plus the 5 opposition days, now 4 that are left, which will also be other iterations of non-confidence votes. But I imagine that they will have, they'll be cute in the language in the sense that they will emphasize things that Liberals and New Democrats have said in the past with regard to not liking things about Justin Trudeau, and they'll sort of put those in the window to have a couple days of communications fun. So on the substance, I think there's enough there for the Liberals to get through until Christmas. There'd be a lot of noise, but typically I think when there's the most noise is because the ground is firm underneath you. When things go quiet is when people are pretty unsure. So I don't imagine there'll be a campaign through between now and Christmas.
Your colleagues are nodding. Tom, do you agree that that's likely the scenario going forward?
Yeah, I believe now the most likely date is the spring with the budget. There will be a certain number of economic things this fall, but you look at the number of candidates that they've put in place, Vassy, you look at their financing, you look at the fact that none of them really has a platform ready. I think that it would be very ambitious for anybody to start taking down the government and deciding they can go to an election. So I do think that that's the lay of the land right now. With regard to the larger picture, I think that Poilievre has to be careful. He's learned to be very careful. His messaging is much more solid than it used to be. He's less tempestuous, but you know what? This bit about the nuclear winter, I think, is going to start to stick to him. But there's something that shows today. He's very headstrong, but there's a difference between being headstrong and being dangerously stubborn at your own expense. That notion, nuclear winter, is something that refers to the calamity that would ensue the use of nuclear weapons. We have an illegal invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. There is a threat by Putin on the table to use nuclear weapons. That's the real world. He wants to be the leader of a G7 country that's also a founding member of NATO. If he's going to be that immature and bandy about a terminology like that, nuclear winter, talking about a carbon tax that, by the way, will ensure that people at the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder get a rebate check that will actually 8 out of 10 of them will get a rebate check that gives them more money than anything they'll have to pay into a carbon tax. People who are starting to get those checks realize that. The public doesn't understand a carbon tax more than a hole in the wall. I'm not sure that a cap and trade system would have been understood a lot more, but it is part of the fight against climate change. And I think most Canadians want that, for us to be doing our share in the world to fight against climate change. So I'm watching Poilievre with some fascination, because that stubbornness, a lot of people criticized him for using that last week. He stood up today and he intentionally and willfully used it again to show that he's right. He hates it when he's compared to Trump. That's pure Donald Trump. The minute Trump says, political correctness says I shouldn't say this, I'll keep repeating it with J.D. Vance and see what happens. Poilievre should realize that he's in a very different country than the U.S., and people are taking notice of how he behaves, how he behaved last week. And I'm going to see and watch the polls between now and Christmas. I think it's going to start to weigh on his numbers.
My guess is, though, that Zita, he and the Conservatives, based on my conversations, feel they have the latitude to do something, as Tom described, because despite the fact that Tom and others like him are talking about a rebate and stuff like that, it hasn't resonated with Canadians. It is unpopular. That's borne out by Premier Eby, Mr. Singh, Premier Fury. Like, a lot of politicians who are not saying that climate change is something we should ignore are disagreeing with the imposition of that policy. My guess is that's what Poilievre is leaning on.
So I think from two perspectives, I agree with Tom. Like, I think it's really dangerous language that Mr. Poilievre is using. I think in terms of the election, the more times he uses it, the more clips there are for Liberals and the NDP and opposition parties are to use it during a campaign. So it's if he continues to go down that road with those unfortunate comments, like, people will be reminded of that when it comes to election time. I think on the price on carbon pollution, like, listen, the Liberals have run on this in 2015, 19, 2021, and now, they've made some adjustments to the program in recent months after the Atlantic premiers raised some questions and they saw a change. And certainly I think the government was responsive to that. They're going to be communicating about it more. To Tom's point about the rebate, a lot of Canadians still, there's an opportunity for them to learn about it. That's absolutely critical for the government to move that forward and increase awareness how they have money in their pocket about this. But I think one thing that is very interesting to see is that neither of the opposition parties have put forward their plan on the climate, on helping climate change, linking that to the economy. If you look at free trade agreements, I believe it's the one with Europe, there are provisions with it on climate provisions as part of the free trade agreement. And so it's really reckless for the opposition to threaten to rip up carbon pricing or any other provisions like that when it has billions of dollars of investment depending on it that Canadian businesses across the country rely on, and have already booked future investments on. And so we'll see what the opposition parties have to roll out. They're oddly quiet about it. And at the end of the day, industry and Canadians need to know what they're putting forward, because they're making multi-billion dollars investments on the matter.
I've got just a minute, and I see both Marika and James want to jump in. James, 30 seconds if you don't mind to respond.
Well, when the Liberals promised a carbon price in the past, I don't think they promised it going into 2015. But in 19 and 21, when they were reelected, don't forget they lost the popular vote. Justin Trudeau has gone from 6.9 million votes across the country now to 5 million in the last campaign, lost the popular vote, and 2/3 of the 31% of Canadians who voted for him in the last election say that he shouldn't run again. Nobody supports the carbon tax other than Liberals. And if you think that going to Canadians and saying, I know you don't like the carbon tax, I know you don't want the prices to come down, but we have a trade agreement that says that we think we should do it, so we're going to do it. Good luck with that on voting day.
Last word to you, Marika.
Look, what I found so interesting about today is that the Liberals went out on the carbon price, defending it and saying it will continue to go up. So that is clearly where they're sticking to. What I'm looking for from the Liberals is an actual message of what they would offer voters heading into another election. Just like the other parties aren't yet fully ready with their offering, we haven't actually seen that from the minority Liberals either.
Okay, I have to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Great discussion. Really appreciate it. Zita Astravas, James Moore, Tom Mulcair, and Marika Walsh. Our takeaway is next.